I'd like to call to order the City of Littleton City Council virtual study session for June 9, 2020. It is 6:30. All council members, with the exception of Councilmember Milliman, is not here. She will join us just a few minutes late. When she does join us, I'll interrupt the meeting and let everybody know that she has joined us. Council, we have two items on our agenda tonight. Our first item is ID 2158 Mile High District update on the South Platte River Works planning. And for council, this is just for the purposes for council to receive an update from Mile High Flood District on the South Platte work and planning. And I'll turn it over to our Public Works Director, Keith Reister. And this is cutting into your time, Keith.
Well, I'll jump right in. So we have Laura Krager tonight with us from Mile High Flood District. Many of you will know Mile High as previously Urban Drainage and Flood Control, and after they achieved AARP status, they decided to change their name after 50 years. So we have some new folks on council, and we haven't really done an update on the South Platte since that time. And Laura's been sort of a key cog with our work with South Platte Working Group and a variety of other things. So we thought it would be really timely to step in tonight and have her give an overview of sort of how we've gotten here related to the South Platte corridor, as well as the work that's been done specifically within Littleton and where we're headed with Reynolds Landing. And I'll touch on the grant application that we currently have in related to Saperchi property and some other things. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and she can jump right in and she'll wave to me or text me if we have to jump in there. So with that, I turn it over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Keith. Nice to see you all. It's too bad we weren't in person, but these days it's nice that we have technology at least to help us out. So thank you for the time tonight. I know several of you are new, and so we're excited to talk about some of the work that we've done over the last, 5 or 6 years on the South Platte River. But I wanted to give you a little introduction of the Mile High Flood District. We are a quasi-governmental agency that was enacted by the state legislature in 1969. So as Keith said, we hit our 50-year mark and thought, gosh, we should really change our name. It's a little easier to say, but the great thing about working at the district is we get to work with all of the local municipalities and counties to really leverage our dollars and come up with some really great projects that not only reduce flood risk for the community, but we also like to think that we create some really nice amenities. So we appreciate your partnership that we've had over the years. I wanted to start out the evening with just a little background on the work that the South Platte Working Group has done. And then we can move on to what we're doing now. And then we'll finish up with talking about Reynolds Landing, which I know is a really important project for the city themselves. I'm going to share my screen. And does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Great. If I end up doing the slideshow, then I miss seeing everybody to the side. So hopefully this is large enough for all of you. So the South Platte Working Group actually has been in a couple phases. And the first phase that was done in the early 90s, they spent a lot of dollars purchasing property, which I think was very important in order to reserve the corridor. In 2012, the Arapahoe County Open Space initiated another kickoff of the working group. This time a little bit more focused on creating projects. And I think what makes the difference in Arapahoe County reach in the South Platte River is that you guys really view this as a green space for all of the communities together. People don't see that you're going from Littleton to Englewood to Sheridan. What they see is green space. And so I think it's really important that the group took on that idea that we're visioning this corridor as a whole. We're not doing it in segments. And I think we've ended up with a lot better projects because of that. The other, I think, point to the group is doing it in a collaborative spirit. I think we all have resources, and we are at our best when we are, putting our resources together in order to provide the better projects. And then how do we create that legacy for the future? So when the group got together, which is made up of elected officials, as well as city managers and special districts. They did a large charrette, and it's interesting because that charrette happened during the 2013 floods. And so I didn't make it through all of that charrette because my phone started exploding of we've got problems going around. But they got the community together as well as the development community and special districts to say, what do we want this corridor to be? How do we maximize it for economic value as well as education and environmental impacts? And so it was really looked at holistically. After that plan was put together, the challenge came of the open space, Arapahoe County Open Space, giving the working group $8 million to leverage. And so with that $8 million, we were able to make that into $25 million over the last 6 years. And I just wanted to highlight those projects that we were able to complete during that time period. At the top is River Run. And basically the reach we're talking about goes from Bear Creek all the way up through South Platte Park to Chatfield. So we completed 4 projects: River Run, Riverside Downs, the first phase of Reynolds Landing, and then South Platte Park, which I think many of you are familiar with. At River Run, it was really about creating a unique regional park experience that celebrated the river. This was a very large project, not only to maintain the 100-year flood conveyance, but how do we optimize the aquatics and riparian health and create new recreation in the river. This is an area that people didn't even know existed. And that was the look that we started out with. So as you can probably imagine, anything would be better than this. What we were able to create in that area has been sort of astonishing. It's been fantastic to see that area activated. And what was neat about this project is that flood control district wanted to repair the drop structures. Englewood had on their vision creating a park and trailhead, and South Suburban was trying to put in the East Bank Trail. Those all could have been done as individual projects, but by doing them all together, we were able to leverage a lot of grant dollars, which really offset the cost for us on the local government side. The next project to highlight is Riverside Downs. That was really an initiative by the city of Littleton, and it was about connecting people to the river. And there was a shopping plaza that had its back to the river. And what this project did was just turned that focal point back and then did a trail connection. This is a lovely project that I think really was a nice partnership with the local businesses as well as for the community. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do any river improvements with that project, and I'll touch on that a little bit. The reason behind that was because of the permitting issues we were struggling with the Corps of Engineers. The next project was the first phase of Reynolds Landing. And this to me was really putting the bones together of what we can build upon. And it was doing those upland improvements. So we added to the parking lot. We also were able to put in a pavilion and some nice restroom facilities as well as a park play area. And then South Platte Park was a project that was really about restoring the natural and beneficial functions back into that area. It was set aside as a floodplain preservation park, but as many of you probably witnessed over the years, because of the change in flows, the characteristics of the river was really having an impact. It was wide, shallow flows, and we were disconnecting the hydrology from the floodplain, and so we were losing a lot of vegetation. And we were able to enhance those areas by reshaping the river and putting in more natural riffle and pool structures. So that was really the completion of that next phase of the working group. What we're focused in on now is what we're calling an implementation plan or a conceptual design. Because as I hinted with Riverside Downs, anything we do in the river through Littleton as well as Arapahoe County from Bear Creek to the park, we have to have permissions from the Corps of Engineers because they were the original sponsor and funder of the channel work. And so anytime there's federal dollars that were used, you have to have their permission. It's called the 408 permission. And as you can imagine, it's a headache and a timely and costly process. So the idea was, if we want to continue with doing improvements to the river, let's go ahead and wholesale get approval on all of them at once. And then when we go back and do the final designs, we'll already have a process in place to be able to be accepted and go through that a little bit smoother. Again, we're trying to deal with the river because it's seen a lot of changes and it's going to see some more changes and flows based off of the Chatfield reallocation. We want to try to bring back more function to the river. There's a lot of desires for people wanting to interact, whether it's on the passive recreation or the active side. And, there's a lot of opportunities for economic development. We've seen that through downtown Denver. The most valued property is along the river in Confluence Park. So what we're looking at is holistically starting from Bear Creek and coming all the way up to Reynolds Landing is one project to at least design. The reason why we separated out Reynolds Landing is because we know we can get through the core process a little smoother because we have some hydraulic benefits to that will make it easier for them to accept the project. And we didn't want to tie that up with the changes that we're introducing downstream. So I think Littleton sits a little bit better with the second phase of Reynolds Landing if we continue to pursue that project. Just want to touch on the community outreach that's been done. When we kicked off this next phase, we did meet with all the stakeholders again to make sure we weren't missing anything and hearing ideas and where were there potential benefits with development that may be occurring that maybe would prioritize a project sooner than later. What ideas did people want to see in the river? So we did that with the local government stakeholders. And pretty much what we heard was better access, how to restore and create more habitat, and then how do we bring recreation. We also met with the river user groups, and that's pretty a broad cross-section right now of people. So you've got the stand-up paddleboard community, you got the river surfing, you've got Trout Unlimited, a lot of people that want to interact with the water. Those uses, unfortunately, don't complement each other all in the same space. But, we do have 6 miles of river to work with. So we can identify where those locations are best. So what came out from that user group was there's just lack of use in some reaches because it's really flat water. They want more diversity in the recreation, again, restoration and habitat, as well as access. So we're going to be moving through that work right now. The South Suburban, Littleton, Englewood, Sheridan, Arapahoe County and the district initiated that initial funding to get design engineers, which is Merrick and DHM, to help with that conceptual design. They are ready to submit plans to us, and we're going to start negotiating with the Corps here very soon. So that part is moving. And before I get into Reynolds Landing, does anybody have any questions in regards to that next phase of work, that conceptual design work? I see some heads shaking, so I'll keep going.
Keep going.
And so when we talk about like that creek within the river, this is a lot of what we're working with, and this is what we've been able to create in the areas that we've done improvements on. It also really helps to take your pictures in winter and then in summer for a more drastic comparison. So Reynolds Landing, which you're all very familiar with, here is Brewery Lane and Breckenridge Brewery, and the parking lot that we enhanced, the pavilion and the restrooms, and then the playground. But there's 3 drop structures that, quite frankly, need some work in order to improve public safety. This one right at the top is a pretty hairy one if you've ever gone down it. So we've got a lot of opportunity here. And, the idea is, how do we have better connectivity? How do we move people through? We have a ton of users on this Mary Carter Greenway Trail. We have some nice opportunity to create some recreation. And then, how do we drive some better economic impacts around? So here's a picture looking upstream at the park. And one of the things I want to mention is that if you're at that pavilion, you actually don't even really interact with the river. And so one of the things we really want to talk about and think about during the design is how do we bring and lay back this bank? I think that the thing that I see the most about any park improvement is what brings people to somewhere and what doesn't, and its interaction with the water and shade. So we definitely want to plant some trees. Shade is really important for people and for children. But Denver, you'll notice, spent a lot of money on some parks the last couple of years, and it's really rare to see people at them because I don't think they did enough to bring people down to the water, which I think is a success that we had at River Run. And so that same idea is we don't need to replicate like the surfing, but the idea of how do we bring those banks down so people can see it and connect with it. This is the drop structure that during higher flows is quite dangerous to move through. And you've seen a ton of use with a lot of people floating with devices from South Platte Park all the way down. And one of the drivers for doing something more in Reynolds Landing may help South Suburban have less people going through the park, which I think is something that they have expressed wanting some help with. And again, it's creating this more of the safer drop structure. This is upstream of Oxford that was just completed. We have done some preliminary design work. We received some grants to do that. There's two different approaches. One could be more of a riffle pool structure, which is what you see in South Platte Park. It doesn't really allow for in-river recreation. Or you can do what we call a drop pool, which looks a little bit more like River Run, where you have a grade control structure with a little waterfalls that people then can float through. So there's two different options that we can do. It's hard to intermix them. So that's something to think about as what you guys desire and what your community desires there. I think the Saperchi property provides a lot of opportunities. This I know will be driven by the city of Littleton and doesn't really need to have much connection with the river project, but there may be some opportunities as we move along. If these projects are happening along the same timeline, we might be able to find some advantages to pulling them together, but we can decide that in the future. But letting you know there's a nice opportunity to engage with people in the Saperchi property. So right now where we sit is we have a design team that's working through preliminary designs, waiting to get some final input from you and the community on what alternative we want to go with. The next steps would be is then to go to the Corps of Engineers with that design. They like to look at it about a 50% level so we can start going through that approval process. The district has got funding this year as well as the next 2 years to help with those costs. It's we're willing to put in a little over a couple $1 million, a little over $2 million. Arapahoe County, I know, is interested in also participating in funding, and that's something that the city's interested in. I think we can leverage some good dollars. So with that, that's just kind of my introduction to people that are new on council. I'm happy to answer any questions or any interest you have.
Great. Thank you, Laura, very much. And Keith, did you have anything you want to add?
Sure, I'll just jump in there for a second since Saperchi came up. The city took really control of the property a little more than a year ago. And since that time, we've been really maintaining the property in partnership with South Suburban and the staff down there. Learned some lessons throughout that process as well. For those of you who've never been down to the Saperchi property, it is a former, agricultural / contractor site that precedes the flood down there. Apparently they ran buffalo down there for a while too, a long time ago. And so in partnership with Mile High and South Platte Working Group, we made the decision to submit an Arapahoe County open space planning grant application this cycle, which is currently in for consideration for a $100,000 planning grant to focus on the Saperchi property itself, how it's going to interact with Reynolds Landing, the potential for utilization on a variety of fronts. We haven't really engaged on this property before because we didn't really want to do that until we, had possession of the property. And, there's a whole host of things that we can talk about with that space that go from, basically a do nothing space to a combination of, education, public access, public-private partnerships to add additional opportunities and learning space throughout that area, as well as some private participation in opportunities on the site, connectivity to the Mary Carter in some unique ways. And so that's why we ask for that planning grant to really, begin that process. And we've got some great consultants with the Reynolds Landing project that have been intimately involved up till this point, as well as South Platte Working Group. So that's kind of in process right now. We'll know on that planning grant here shortly. The timing on the grants there have been, kind of changing a little bit with everything going on with, all of us out there. So that's just kind of a little supplement to Laura's comments about the project itself. But we're really fortunate to be in a situation where we look at this river corridor as an entire entity. And if you haven't been down there to see some of the work in the past, for example, the reach that's just south of Reynolds, that stretch a lot of work has been done to increase wildlife access and fishing and in a variety of naturalized areas. And so it's been pretty exciting, and it ties into our mission for South Platte. So, it's kind of a bigger picture, and we're excited about where it's going in the future.
Great, thank you. And just for the record, Councilmember Milliman did join us just shortly after we started the presentation. So thank you. I do have a question. A few years ago, after we had done a bunch of work down there south of Reynolds Landing, I believe it was, the storms came in and ripped out a lot of the ground cover that we put in. Has that all been restored, Keith?
Laura can answer that better than I can.
Sure. Yes, we had just finished the third phase in South Platte Park, and that was the last phase. And unfortunately, that was 2015 when we had the high water for 2.5 months. And so we lost all this topsoil that we brought in and the blanket. And so we were appreciative of Littleton stepping in, and as well as the district in Arapahoe County, to add the additional money to put it together. And we were able to get that in, and it's been very successful. We've got the vegetation coming back, and we're in good shape now.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah. Great. Council, do we have any questions? We'll start with Karina.
Thank you, Laura. Good to see you again. So I think I heard that there was design work that was done along the river, but there's also design work being done for Super Chi. So are those being done together so we can envision a bigger space, or being done independently?
Good question. So we didn't want to move too far with Saperchi until, again, you guys had that ownership of it. And so we had just did a sketch at one point to show that we could connect the two. And that would be a great idea, but we haven't taken that official step yet to connect them. And we're waiting to see what your guidance is going to be on that.
Keith, do you want to comment on that?
I think Laura's characterization is correct. And that's why we sought to get a separate grant so that the city would have the opportunity to take a leadership role with Saperchi, as opposed to seeing it as just a small segment of the Reynolds Landing project, because we felt that the city's invested time and resources and has a historical tie to that property, and it was important to kind of treat that as a little bit of a standalone within the bigger project.
Okay, so we're going to progress independently at this point. Is that what I'm hearing, Dan?
We're securing the money independently. It's our intent to work with our partners throughout this. We're not just going to work in a vacuum to do that work. There's been so much work done already that they all have to tie together. So it's a collaborative effort, even though we're going to be the lead agency, much like, Mile High is the lead agency in the river. We're a collaborator kind of in that direction. So that's the way we're going to approach this.
Okay, thanks.
An example for that, if I can just add, is that it's similar to how we handled the trail improvement with Englewood. So we would have a river meeting, and then we would connect with the park meeting to make sure that we were staying coordinated. And then the park improvement would have the meeting afterwards. So that I think we're pretty good at that coordination piece to take advantage of what we can together, Great. But also let people have that commitment to their own property.
And Scott, I know you have a question.
Laura, thanks for being here. What other projects does the district have going on or have planned in Littleton?
In Littleton? That's a great question. And off the top of my head, I don't know. We just finished up the project on Jackass Gulch.
We have, go ahead, Laura. I mean, we've got continuing work on Jackass. We've got work on Slaughterhouse. We've got several other projects out there. Our stormwater team works, pretty hand in hand since, all the work that we do from a stormwater perspective, our goal from the moment it hits the ground somewhere is that, it all eventually is going to end up in the South Platte. And it's our objective to do as much when it comes to water quality as possible. And one of the missions that we really brought in the last few years with Mile High and Arapahoe County is to really try and maximize projects to be really multifaceted, to integrate both water quality, erosion control, water flood management, but also trail systems, engagement of the public in new ways, bring that habitat restoration back. And, the Jackass Gulch project we did is a really good example of that. And that's really our effective goal in partnering with everybody. We want to take as much opportunity to make these multifaceted and do as much as we can with them as we do it. So.
All right, thank you. Scott, was that it? Okay. Any other questions? Well, Laura, thank you. Karina has one more question and Kelly has one. Well, Kelly, let's go to Kelly first.
Hi, Laura. Nice to meet you.
You too.
So I had a quick question. I live really close to Reynolds Landing. In fact, I probably walk over there at least 5 times a week with my dogs. I think you said, and I'm sorry if I missed what the idea was, you said something about tying Reynolds Landing more or encouraging people that are at that picnic area to the river. And I thought you said something about, is that bike trail going to move or is it going to be a change? And can you explain it? And I will tell you, I agree with you on that first rapid. I've been down all 3 of those rapids many times. That one's scary.
It is. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we've looked at trail realignment through there. We probably want to have the Mary Carter Greenway Trail where people are just passing through the park. Keep that separated from the park users and have some soft trails that can go down. We're looking at some terracing. You're going to need some walls in some of those sections because it gets steep. So we haven't settled on anything, but a variety of options are available to us. But most of them include doing something with the trail. Yeah.
Patrick, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Laura, for joining us. I should probably know this, but who controls the flow of the water? Is that the Corps of Engineers? And when do they ultimately decide to release the water from Chatfield? Is it people calling for downstream? How does that all work? Maybe that's the key. I'm not sure.
It's quite an orchestration. So Denver Water kind of has a pretty good formula, and they work with, and I don't remember the gentleman's name up in Greeley, but basically each day people put their calls in, and based off of their formula with looking at water that's being released from Cherry Creek and Bear Creek and Chatfield, how to satisfy those releases. Mm-hmm. And then they call the Corps, and the Corps actually makes the gate changes daily, but it's essentially Denver Water that does that coordination on what the flow release should be.
Gotcha. And so then with Chatfield now complete, they're built out and raising the acres of water they have there. Is that lake now considered full? Do you know?
I don't know I don't think they've hit what they are allowed to, the additional storage, but they are starting to fill it.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that. It looks like it's full, but that's why I was asking.
But that's a good question. I don't know if it is, and it looks like maybe somebody else might have that answer.
And I got Karina and Scott, but Carol, Pam, do you have anything? Okay, we'll go to Karina, Scott, and then Kelly.
Coming back to the Reynolds Landing project, between what you're doing, Laura, and Keith, what we're, embarking on with Super Cheat. Can you give us a rough estimate of what are we looking at, like a timeline, like what phase are we in now, and X years from now we'll be in next phase. So if you can give me a sense of timeline and also a sense of maybe total investment eventually that we need to look at.
Sure. I can talk about the river. Right now we're into conceptual preliminary design, which we hope to have done in the next year, which will move to final design, which will take another year. I know the district and Arapahoe County talked about funding in 2023 is when we would have, maybe hopefully enough funds together. And Keith and I have talked about that as well, based off of what your budget issues, what you can start putting in. We've looked at a wide range of costs, from, a cheaper fix being $4 to $5 million to doing maybe a little bit nicer version in the $8 million range.
All right, thank you. And we'll go to Scott.
Or this is probably a strange question, but there are a few of us on council who really enjoy fly fishing, and every tailwater upstream of Chatfield, so including Cheeseman, 11 Mile, and so on, is gold medal waters. And I've always had this pipe dream that South Platte Park could sustain that kind of fishery. Keith tells me I am dreaming, but is there any conceivable future where that could happen?
I second that, Scott.
Yeah, I don't see it, unfortunately. We're definitely in a warm water condition down here. We don't have the depths and the flows to keep the temperatures that in order to have the trout procreate. So we're relying on it being stocked. I think we're making some improvements to get options in there, but I just don't see that we have the environment. It hasn't never been that way down here before. We're in a flat area, and we just don't have the depths that are needed to keep that cool water.
All right, thanks for asking that question, Scott. Kelly.
I'm going to circle back to water flows just for a little bit. I think the South Platte Working Group actually put out something in their recent communications saying, they encourage people to use the river to recreate and all, but when the water flows are less than 50 cubic feet per second, probably shouldn't be in the river because you can impact the integrity of the river bottom, the wildlife, yada, yada, yada. So if we are, doing all these great things to try to pull people, more people into the river, where's that loud and clear education to the public? As people start putting their tubes in, at Santa Fe to float to the Platte River Grill or wherever. How do we partnership or do a better job of educating people? I mean, because I will be honest, I think I've floated on that river a couple of times where it really wasn't floating, it was walking and dragging a tube, and now I feel horrible for doing that. But anyway, I don't know if that's a discussion for tonight or later, but I thought I'd bring it up.
It's interesting. I didn't know they had put something out there in that regard. I think it's like anything, there's a double-edged sword, is that you want to preserve corridors, but if people don't ever get to use them and appreciate them, then the preservation piece kind of goes away. So I'm with you that it's a balance. And my hunch is that the more people that are down interacting, the more respect they're going to have for it. And that would then provide opportunity for education. I know my kids have spent a lot of time down at River Run with river surfing. And the first thing my son does in the morning is to check the flows. And, I think if there was something out there that said, flows are this today, this is what we recommend recreation being, is, maybe that's just a time you're going to go down and enjoy watching the bugs and bunnies more than interacting with the water or putting your fly rod in. And, when flows are this range, it's a great time to get in the water. So I think people are getting more savvy with going to those channels to understand the flows, and that might be an opportunity. but I think we have a long way to go.
I think that's
Hey,
a
Mark,
great
correct me
idea.
if I'm
though. I
wrong.
think
Isn't it
that's a great
South
idea.
Park that South Suburban that would manage that part of it?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I was asking Mark. I was thinking Mark knew, or Keith even, that South Suburban actually manages the park itself, and it would probably have something to do with signage.
Yeah, South Suburban manages the park. We obviously collaborate with them, and when we're faced with the river closure, I think last summer or the summer before, council has given Mark the authority to make that in-river call to limit access to the river if necessary as the city manager. And I can just tell you from interacting with the staff down there, on a almost daily basis that, if there's anybody watching that river and working with river users, it's certainly the staff down there. We've, over the last 2 weeks, we've been working with, Adventure West, the vendor that has been operating a tubing operation in the river. This would be their second season, as well as other users. And, the staff down there really knows the pulse of the river as well as the users in a really, really great way. And I speaking on my experience of working with the staff down there, they're the one that'll make the call and work with us to do what needs to be done. And, if there's a question about anything, we're, on the phone, text and email. And that's one of the great things about the staff down there. I'm not sure there's anybody more passionate about the South Platte River than Scott, I think, down there. Scott Latona down at South Platte Park. I can tell you that just from experience, which is great to have somebody like that down there.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Council. That was Mark.
Yeah, sorry, Mayor. One thing I guess I just wanted to touch on, just to make sure Council is aware of this, but when we talk about the Superchi property, this was an agreement that the city entered into many years ago. In fact, Jerry, you may remember exactly when, but
I do.
There was a living will on this property. So the owner, a woman there, lived on there for several years and then recently just passed away. And so when she did, that was when the city buy agreement then took full ownership. So we've already paid for this, but the living will kind of delayed our access to that.
It also took quite a bit of work to clean up the property. As I recall, it was a lot of construction material.
Correct.
Great. Well, Keith, if you don't have anything else, thank you very much, Laura.
I think Laura has one more comment.
I was able to pull up the work plan and answer the question about whether projects are going on in Littleton.
Yes.
I can just tell you real quick. We've got Dad Clark Gulch at Mineral, Dad Clark Gulch at Santa Fe, Littles Creek at Gallup, Jackass Gulch at the Highline Canal, and then Rangeview at Santa Fe. It sounds like it's also part of the Dad Clark Santa Fe project. So those are the projects that are new this year that are going to be in Littleton.
Well, thank you for looking that up. And by the way, just for council, the Mile High Flood District goes way north. They go up, cover parts of Boulder and Adams County, and they cover quite the extensive area. And we're just one piece of it. So, Laura, thank you very much for making the time to be with us.
Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Alrighty. Thank you very much. All righty. Great. Council, we'll move on to our second item, which is ID 20-156. The subject is the Public Works update on capital planning and spending of infrastructure, transportation, and facilities area for the city. And I believe staff is looking for some direction from council. The Public Works would like to receive directions from City Council on how to proceed with reaching the future public works capital needs. And I'll turn it over to City Manager Mark Ruff to start her out.
All right, Mayor. I think actually I'm going to turn it over to Keith here, let him run with it. And maybe at the end here, I just have a few comments to kind of add.
Great, thank you.
So, Council, thanks for the time tonight. We've got, another 2.5, 3 hours planned for you, so we're good to go.
By the way, you're using up your 20 minutes.
So, in talking with the city manager and the finance staff and a few other things, we really haven't touched base with council as to the status of where we are from a public works perspective, at some level what we actually do, and also talk about where we are in that transition to having the community know what their assets are, what the value of them are, and what we need to maintain and operate those going forward. And I'm going to highlight some of that here with just a few slides to kind of give you some background. And also, Tiffany's on the line to assist related to the financial side if we need be. But, we're going to be, as part of this process, we're really kind of sharing what the financial picture is going to look like over the decades to come. From a public works perspective, that's the timeframes that we really look at. The bridge project that we have on Rio Grande right next to the Littleton Center, I mean, that thing was built in 1928. And so, the project work we do, we're kind of thinking out that far sometimes. So I'm going to pop up, I'm going to do a little screen share here and go through some slides for you quickly. And let me move some stuff around so I can get everybody in here. Whoops, there we go. That's not what we want. Hold on. There we go. Let me get the slideshow and pop that on. Okay. So everybody see that okay? Jerry, we good? Okay. So, basically just a quick overview, public works, we're going to cover, a little bit about what we do, where we've been and where we're headed, as well as identify, kind of funding and capital needs and gaps. And one of the things we want to talk with you about tonight is sort of where are we going and what does that picture look like over the next, both short and long term. Just kind of a, snapshot, public works. We cover, administration, engineering, traffic, streets. You can see that fleet and facilities management, grounds, utilities, stormwater, wastewater, and asset management. And we have about 72 employees plus seasonals. We don't have any seasonals right now with the current situation. I'll touch on COVID impacts here a little bit later because that's relatively important as well. These are just some of our regional partnerships that we operate with. You just got a quick snapshot of what the steering committee has talked about related to the South Platte Water Renewal Partners name right there at the top. Obviously, Mile High Flood District, and several of you have been involved in these working groups, and they're an important part of all the collaborative work we do because, as we just talked about with the river being multi-jurisdictional, very few people know when they leave one jurisdiction and go into another when it comes to things like transportation. So that's why that collaborative effort is quite important. In 2020, our general fund expenditures were slated at $7.5 million. You can see the breakdown there. What is very typical in those groups is that the majority of your expenditures are related to people, not really in investments in terms of assets or those kind of things. That's a lot of people there, as well as some maintenance and those kind of things, but that generally is housed elsewhere. Our other funds that we're involved in is open space, which we've talked about a little bit. Our budget for this year is about 1.5, with the ending balance in that account at $3 million. Our portion of the capital fund, you can see there is $300,000 in FM, about 4.9 in infrastructure, and about 850,000 in fleet. And I'm going to come back to that small set of numbers a little bit later in the presentation. But I also want to touch on some things as we go forward and why master planning is important, and relate that back to, for example, the fleet and the facilities numbers that are there. The two utility divisions, our budget in storm is $1.2 million, and that was a good, we just talked a little bit about that. In the sewer budget this year is $21 million, and our year-end cash balance is projected to be about $17 million. This past year, last fall, we added in management of Geneva Village, which had been managed by South Metro Housing Options for the last 2 decades, and we took over management of that property last fall. That doesn't really reflect the capital investment we've made in that property over the years, as necessary to kind of keep it going over the years as well with South Metro Housing Options. Capital planning and master planning is pretty critical in the bigger scheme of things. And why do we really engage in that master planning is, first of all, assessing where we are, understanding our current assets, projecting future needs, risk assignment, which is very critical. And that's how we allocate resources, and then trying to align those resources. The second portion of that, which is what I'll touch on here in a bit, is the planning for funds, both internal and external, as well as grant funding. And what I'm going to refer to as shovel and hammer ready projects. The whole shovel ready project thing came about during the stimulus time back in the recession in the early 2000s, and that's become kind of a common term. And so I'll touch on that a little bit here in a few minutes. So these are the master plans that we would typically expect a community of our type to have in place. We've talked about the TMP, engineering and design standards related to development in our own work, a traffic master plan, looking at all of our signalization and intersections, how we operate, how they're interconnected with us in the region, an ADA transition plan, which identifies what our infrastructure is deficient in related to both outside infrastructure as well as facilities, and how we're going to be addressing those over time. That's a federally required plan. Pavement management, you saw the first slash at that last fall, 5-year management plan, a sewer master plan, stormwater master plan. We actually alluded to the bridge master plan a couple of weeks ago when we were in front of you with an IGA related to a $1.2 million grant for a bridge rehabilitation. Likewise, the city's facilities. We currently have a couple 100,000 square feet under roof and a lot more acreage on top of that we manage. It was obviously much bigger when we had the fire department with us, but that's our current snapshot. A cost of services study, which really we understand what we spend to do what we do. Asset management, this didn't even exist, period, within the city until about 2 years ago. Understanding what we do and how we manage, how we do the work, and track what it is, and know what it is. This is related to, for example, the project we've done over the last 2 years on the sewer side and the storm side, where we spent a couple of $1 million to camera every inch of pipe that we have in the city and assess what it is, what condition it's in, how do we look at the risk for those. We found interesting things like, raccoons wandering around inside those pipes as well. And, those kind of things. And then how do we relate that to long-term planning? Why is that important? We have camera equipment, but because of the staffing size and the amount of funding we had, we typically for the last several years have only done reactive camera work when there's an emergency or an issue. And so most good utilities would do about 20 to 25% of their system a year camera-wise. As a side note, we also found an extra, 40% of pipe in the ground on the storm side that we didn't know was there. Those kind of things. Sustainability, we've touched on that a little bit, but not a lot. A fiber master plan, which goes to, how do we interconnect our facilities with other facilities in the area, Arapahoe County, Littleton Public Schools, those folks, as well as tie together all of our signals. This is kind of an important one because in the next couple of weeks, you're going to see a request for approval of a grant application for basically $680,000 to add fiber and upgrade all the signals on Broadway over the next few years with about $140,000 in local match to make that happen, to really improve technology and operations. An undergrounding plan, for those of you who don't know, when you drive around, you see power poles and the like with utility wires on those. We need a plan to understand when and how we're going to underground those utilities over time. If you go to a city, for example, like Fort Collins, they've been working on this for 40 years and there's almost no aerial infrastructure left. And there's a variety of reasons to do it. A storm like this past couple of days, more underground infrastructure helps not losing your power, like happened at the Littleton Center this afternoon, for example. And as part of that, on every one of the bills that you pay to Excel, there's a little fee that goes on there that goes into an undergrounding fund, which they hold to allow us to underground Excel equipment that currently stands at about $4 million, but we can't access that without an undergrounding plan. That also is a side note that only addresses Excel's assets. On a typical power pole, there's an additional 4 to 5 other utilities that generally we or a developer would have to pay to underground in addition to the Excel work. And then a grounds master plan, and in our scope that we don't actually maintain a lot of parks other than Geneva Park around Littleton Center, but across the city, including medians, we currently irrigate 2 million square feet of ground a year. And so we need to have a grounds master plan for that. We just finished an assessment on that. One of the other things that's not on this list that we've talked about quite a bit in the last few days on the staff side is a water resources management plan. We don't have a huge water portfolio, but it's important for us to understand what that is and how it's going to be utilized as we talk about things like Kettering, the Highline Canal, places like Ridgeview Park, and other assets in the city. And we've never had that plan either. So what is important about this list is in 2015, none of these plans existed in Littleton. And so there's some other plans that we have had that need some updating. Like the bike and ped plan, now that we've done the transportation plan, needs updating. We need additional corridor studies like Broadway, the open space master plan, where we need to continue to update that over time as things change. Development standards, where we kicked off this afternoon a rate study update with our consultant with finance, as well as where should our impact fee structure be. This is the current status of where we are. The 3 in yellow have been completed. The ones in green are currently underway and will be completed between now and probably 18 months from now. The other ones you see in the blue are all future plans that we currently don't have time or resources set aside for. The reason I point this out is because as we try and answer questions about the future of our capital spending and investment, we still have a ways to go to be able to understand what that looks like. We're getting closer, but we still have a ways to go. I did put a note in there where it says fiber master plan, and it says not State Bill 152, which was related to municipal provision of internet services. That fiber master plan does not touch on that question, which is a completely other issue. So, but these are all the plans that we are and the status of those. So what does that mean? In our long-term financial planning, the pavement management plan, the sewer master plan, and the open space master plan are generally speaking covered from a financial plan inclusion standpoint. The pavement management plan was the set aside that came through the fire exit. The sewer master plan is covered at some level during the rate structure that we have in the rate study. And the open space master plan is really tied to the funding that we get in that category. Now, we have to remember that Arapahoe County's open space tax is due to sunset in the next 2 years. And so that the funding of that plan could be in jeopardy based on what the voters do with that situation. On the right-hand side are all plans that are currently not addressed in our long-term financial planning. The TMP, and those are the numbers underneath those that they could potentially range from. Downtown streetscaping and parking, for example, the undergrounding plan, the facilities master plan. You're probably like, why is that $50 to $100 million? Well, at some point we've got to deal with the libraries going to need work. The museum's now 20 years old. The Public Works Facilities Campus, 75% of the buildings on there were built prior to 1950. And so we're in the process of assessing those future needs. The grounds master plan, we have acres of medians we need to address and other things. The ADA master plan over time, at our current rate of $100,000 a year, we should be able to complete the ADA master plan infrastructure in 812 years. was the calculation our staff recently did. The stormwater master plan, and of course, the number in the fiber master plan we've identified is $2 to $4 million. We've tried to get a little money in with paving and pizza, but that wasn't enough to get us over the hump on that. So, we wanted to make sure we tossed that picture in there. Infrastructure on the transportation side, just a little background. Our PCI, our pavement condition index, which we all kind of measure, is 62. Because we've been behind on pavement management. We're in the bottom quartile of all cities, towns, and counties in Colorado. We didn't have any impact fees in this city until 2014. And you can really look at some level as a lost opportunity when development came, because those impact fees would allow us to address capacity issues. And what that means on the transportation side is, okay, so everything's grown up around us and we need to add capacity to intersections, whether it's additional turn lanes, signal infrastructure, all those kind of things, additional bike ped lanes and that kind of stuff that come as the city grows. And we really don't have a big pot of money there, which is different than a lot of our peer cities. For those of you new to the business, a lot of the Front Range cities have had impact fees in place, at least in transportation, since the late 80s, early 90s. Some of the other big wins that we've had, though, recently are the pavement management plan. I can't say enough about our engineering team and the work they did on that. The transportation master plan, which you were a leading role in. The capital set aside for street maintenance. This was the first year that we have that money available. The federal and Bowles improvements with Tabor in the general fund. If you haven't experienced the road being closed as of this morning, feel free to drive out there and not go through that intersection for the next few weeks, would probably be my advice, but you can still get to the golf course. We made sure that was the case. The PEL study, which is just kicking off now, we're super excited about. That's the picture on the right. The project where we've been able to bring in a substantial amount of outside funding for the Rio Grande Bridge project. And we've been able to recently acquire some additional design money. And we've applied with the Arapahoe County Open Space Grants for an additional $400,000 to not only take care of the bridge, but also add bike and pedestrian facilities that would connect the community trail onto downtown and to the Mary Carter, which is a pretty exciting project and was ranked as the #1 project in Littleton in the East-West connectivity study by the South Platte Working Group a couple of years ago. As well as the TIP projects. You're all familiar with those, Santa Fe and Mineral, County Line Road, and those ones. And then we've also been successful in securing a good number of faster and safe routes to school grants. And the faster grants are pretty awesome because they have no local match. So those are we really like to get those, obviously. So let's talk about COVID for a second. Going into this year, I referred back to that slide from the original budget. You can see down the left side what was planned on expenditures this year. Facilities, $300,000, infrastructure. You see the 4.9 plus 1.4 in carryover from continuing projects, about 850 in fleet. The Littleton Center capacity project with impact fees of 1.9 million, wastewater and stormwater projects. I want to touch before I move to the right-hand column on facilities and fleet. On the fleet side, our fleet plan shows that we need to be spending an average of $1.1 to $1.2 million a year to keep up with our existing fleet needs. And that is keeping up. That's not ahead of the curve. That's not better than industry standard. It's none of those things. So we have an ongoing gap there. On the facility side, that 300 number has been there for a lot of years. And just based on our pure square footage, industry best practice, including the landscaping side, we should be spending about $850,000 a year. And as you start to see the facilities master plan later this year, you're going to see that we haven't really invested a lot in our facilities. And as a result, we have some numbers out there that are going to be pretty challenging. What have we done this year related to COVID? Well, most of the facilities work is obviously going to continue. And in fact, if anything, we're going to spend more money because of the necessity of COVID. If you've been into the Littleton Center, like the mayor was today, you can see a lot more plexiglass around, for example, as you come into the Littleton Center. On the infrastructure side, we have only released to contract $1.5 million in work. Of that, $6 million on the left. Some of the work we're in the process of bidding, but we have not awarded that work. And we've been working with Mark and the finance team to make decisions on how we're going to do that based on the financial implications of COVID. We're also starting to get to a point in the year when if we go a lot longer without letting that work to contract on the infrastructure side, we're not going to be able to proceed with that work in 2020 because it'll be too late in the construction season. On the fleet side, generally we order those cars in November and December, so they get here in 2020. So that 850's been spent this year already. The Littleton Center capacity project we're planning on moving forward with in the wastewater and stormwater projects are proceeding as we speak in the utilities. One of those is going to be going through the Mayor Pro Tem's backyard here shortly when we do the slip lining on the wastewater pipes out there, as you saw. I do want to take a quick highlight, though, in the time of COVID, that we have taken this as an opportunity to do a couple things. As you probably don't know, up until about a year and a half ago, in the basement of the Bellevue campus, we had about 450 boxes of uncatalogued Public Works files. None of them digitized, and we didn't know what was in there. So about a year ago, we brought in some resources and we cataloged everything in there. And we have taken this time to accelerate the project of scanning all of those into a digital archive, which will then allow us to do some pretty cool things, not only for accessing data, but eventual vision would be to, let's say you want to develop a property or know what's going on with the property. You'd be able to click on a property on the GIS map, and all the documents affiliated with that property over time will be accessible to you to look at in real time on the web. And so we're working with that community development to do that. And why did we accelerate that? With some of the staff that was furloughed at the library, they have returned to work as part of the Public Works Department, as part of the scanning team over at the Bellevue campus, which has been great for them. And it's also setting the template for multi-departmental work on this going forward, which is pretty exciting. The other one you'll see above that is the Denver Water Pilot Project. All of you have personally experienced what happens when there's a water cut out there in the street, and it seems like it takes a long, long time to get that patch fixed. And so we made a proposal recently to Denver Water that to help with their work, to improve the quality of the work and the time, that we could potentially become on some projects their pavement restoration contractor for a cost. And they have never done this before. And so we believe we can do this in certain project areas with them. And so we are currently piloting 3 small projects of different types to see how that works and potentially create a really unique collaboration. And also it would be a way for us to bring some additional funding into the street area to help us do additional work over time. So it's kind of a neat little pilot project we have underway right now that is completely unique to Littleton and anywhere in the Denver water service area. I do want to highlight this because this is really pretty cool chart. Prior to 2015, over the last decade or so, we brought in about $500,000 in transportation grants. In the last few years, we've been able to bring in awarded amounts of $21 million. That number is actually higher if you add in, say, like the County Line Road project. Our chunk of that's only $2 million, and our partners' portion of that is another $18 million, which we're a partnership in. So you can see there, how much we requested. The obligated local match with those grants is $4.7 million. Currently, we have budgeted a little more than half of that, about half of that money. Right now, we have not settled on how we're going to fund the additional $2.5 million in local match needed between basically 2021 and 2024 on those grant projects. with some reallocation of the maintenance dollars, we can meet that need, but that's a policy decision we'll need to talk through with council and some other things. One of the things I do want to highlight is the portion down below. The success rates that we've had of 2/3 and 79% related to grant awards is a pretty extraordinary ratio. And that's really a reflection of the quality of our team members, both in public works and finance and the city manager's office, to do great reconnaissance work, to do great preparation and relationship building, and to do that. And these are just the transportation grants. This doesn't even touch on police or open space or any of those kind of things. So this is pretty exciting. On this chart, we need to hone in eventually on that $2.5 million gap over the next few years, which is pretty important. Finally, beyond 2020, I just mentioned the local grant. If you look at the transportation master plan goals, our annual gaps, upwards to $10 million, but that's over 40 to 50 years. HUTF, Highway User Tax Fund, you more commonly know that as the gas tax. At best, I'm going to say it's flatlined, but we're expecting a decline of some portion this year due to lack of travel, due to COVID. So we're expecting some hit in that area. It's about $1.4 million a year for us. But we've seen a continuing decline in not only the value, but the amount of HUTF dollars, because, it's one of the downsides of more fuel efficient cars is less gas expenditures. So we expect that that's going to be something, and they haven't really raised the gas tax at the US federal level since the Reagan administration. So, we haven't kept up with inflation either. So that's a product out there. One of the ongoing transportation debates in the state is, since Tabor was passed, there's been no statewide ballot initiative supporting any transportation initiative that has been passed by the voters. So there is no statewide transportation solution for funding at this point in time. And there's an ongoing debate as to, should we try and create smaller regional entities to try and do those solutions? And if you do that, does that undermine a bigger statewide solution? And that's sort of an ongoing policy and political debate here in the state. One of the questions we often get is, when are they going to extend the light rail from Mineral Station down to Lucent? Currently, that's budgeted for 2040 plus in the RTD long-term plan, and that number on that's about $180 million at this point in time. Because we don't have very many master plans, we have minimal shovel and hammer ready projects that we can go chase funding with, because we don't really have design work that's been done and engineering work that's been done to be ready to go chase that. So that's something we need to continue to work on. And I mentioned the public works facilities. We're in the process of doing a space planning and facility assessment. It's been a little bit delayed with COVID over at the public works facilities, and there's many other departments that are also housed at Bellevue for various things. And as I mentioned, we bought that from public service in the early 90s, and most of the buildings there were built just after World War II, and really nothing's been done with those since that time. So this is the last slide. The future discussion items that are out there are, sort of the near term. We need to continue on the master planning. We need to talk about the local match on the TIP grants that are out there, and the maintenance of our existing facilities and infrastructure. In the more mid and long term, the long-term discussion of funding critical capital needs, not just infrastructure, but facilities and police and all those other things. And then how do we continue to leverage partnerships and grants? From my professional view, the only way we're going to be successful is to continue to be able to leverage partnerships over time and collaboration. And we need to really make sure that we're aligned to do that. And then long-term, how do we address capacity and growth, meeting future maintenance needs? And as I mentioned, that grant request for fiber on Broadway, how do we manage technology changes as they go forward? And we need to catch up in some of those areas. For example, just tying our traffic signals together so that we're able to respond in real time and to also be able to control them better. Those are just examples of how we need to continue to move forward in those areas. So with that, that's really what we wanted to cover and open the discussion as to, here's where we are. We're going to continue to, for both you and the community, be able to help you fully understand what you have, what state it's in, and what it looks like to meet the current and future needs of the community and also the region. And that's not just residents, but that's business, that's community members, that's all of those things. And, we're setting that timetable so you'll be able to have a better picture of that going forward. We're only partially there, but that's kind of where we are. But some of those near-term issues related to funding are going to be important to all of us as we look into the 2021, 22, and 23 budget years. So with that, I'll kick it back to you, Mayor, or perhaps Mark, if he wants to add in before we kick it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Keith. That was great. I have one question on one of the slides. You said on that green slide 5, I believe it was, you said that there were current projects. When was green scheduled to be done?
Those are all kind of in a different state. My guess is realistically, my expectation is that those will be done in groups. Some will be done in the next few months. Most of them, I would expect that we should be able to get through most of them in the next 12 to 18 months, as long as we continue to be aggressive in our work in those areas.
Thank you. Mark.
Well, I think Keith has done a great job kind of setting up the bigger picture here. And maybe, Mayor, I might just turn it back over to you and the council, maybe to ask Keith a few questions. One of the things I do want to talk about towards the end here is kind of the challenge that we've got in the capital fund. There's nothing new here. We've certainly been talking about it for the past few years, and certainly came up in our most recent retreat here back in February. I think the COVID-19 has kind of complicated that because, and Tiffany can comment on this on June 23rd. She's actually here tonight too, but we're seeing a reduction in the gas taxes. Keith has mentioned our use tax, which is the other main resource that goes into the capital projects fund. We're also seeing a major decline there. So I think that's why we're just in this difficult position here for 2020 on being able to limit the amount of construction contracts. But I'm going to come back to that here, if you don't mind, Mayor, at the end after council asks a few questions of Keith.
Right. I'm sure we have questions. Now, I'm going to start out with the first question here, if I could, for Tiffany. What is our expected, or is the budget for Public Works impacted by this the events that we've had here the last 3 months, or the past quarter at least? Tiffany?
I think, I'll go ahead. I think Mark already kind of touched on that. Definitely the HUTF funds, we're expecting to see a decline in that just because it's related to gas tax. And if fewer people are driving, then gas tax are probably going to go down. I think the other piece is the building use tax. That is primarily what funds our capital projects funds. Other than HUTF and the 3.1 million from the general fund. And that not only has to fund some of the public works projects, but it also has to fund our capital leases, our debt payments, IT technology related projects. Police has equipment needs and building and maintenance. So there's a number of things that we're going to have to look at over the next couple of years in the capital projects funds, because we are going to see a decline. It's just a matter of how much.
Okay. Council. We'll start with Scott.
Thanks for coming, Keith. I'm always pretty bummed out when you give that presentation.
The only thing worse is when Mark gives it.
So, look, I think everyone can agree on the premise that, to continue maintaining and enhancing our city takes a perennial and significant financial investment. But there's this very clear story that you're telling of radical funding shortages. And to me, that runs a real risk of long-term decline. And we're not the only city who's dealing with that. And so speaking in terms of partnerships, And in terms of planning, I mean, what's on everybody's mind in the public works community about how we sort of change the ending to this story and come up with enough funding to meet the needs of our communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, Scott, I want to let you know I prepped Laura beforehand on the fly fishing question, just so I want to make sure you knew it was coming. So
appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think from collectively as a public works industry, one of the things that I think one of the good sides of Tabor, frankly, for all its other sides, is that it really focused people on understanding that it's important to associate the cost that you charge people with the infrastructure or the utility that it's tied to. And that's something that's really dramatically changed in Colorado the last 30 years. And I think that's important. We see that certainly in stormwater and sewer, and those are things that historically used to be in general funds, which have been divided out now since then. I think, in some ways, transportation is part of that. Collectively in the state, at some point, we're going to have to talk about a statewide solution is where we go there. I think the other part of this is, for me, one of the things that we really focus on is creativity. Like I touched on earlier, those multifaceted projects, the ability to bring together multiple funding sources and to be creative is important. And, one of the things we're building our philosophy around in our team here in the master planning efforts is, how do we maximize our opportunities and leverage them? And one of the things I listed in the master plans was risk assessment. And that, I think, is one of the things that's been lacking in a lot of public sector master plans over time is we really need to take a look at what risks are associated with not making investments, because there are certainly investments that we can defer over time and spread out and do different things with based on risk profile. That's something that's important. I also think, for example, we talked about the sewer fund. We've talked about the sewer fund before, and realistically, that's a great example of multi-regional collaboration. And transportation, that's the only way you can work on it is regional, because nobody's restricted to the borders of Littleton. But I think that for here in Littleton, I think one of the important things is that gap in the master planning closing that gap is really important, because then we can have a fully informed discussion about what we have and what's important to us as a community. And, we all have to make a choice in what we spend those dollars on. And I think it's really important for council and the community to be fully informed. That doesn't mean we're going to go spend all that money or have them funding to do it, but we need to understand what it is we have and what the risks are associated with investments. And
Keith, for the sake of getting to some more questions, I'm going to try to wrap up on that one, if you don't mind. Let's go to council now. Let's go. We'll go Pam, then we'll go Kelly, Karina, Carol. So we'll start with Pam. Pam, did you have a question?
Yes, sorry. This is kind of a myopic question, but what is the sustainability plan?
Typically a sustainability plan, over the way I kind of put this from my perspective as a public works professional is for the longest time as communities on the infrastructure and public works side, we really thought of three things to build projects, which is quality, schedule, and cost. Three legs of the stool. And as we look at our impacts on the bigger global picture, our impacts on things like water quality, the river, just general environmental issues, and how we interact with that portion of our world, sustainability is part of that. And that's really, to me, a fourth leg of the stool in decision making. And what sustainability means to our community can be very different than other communities. Is it likely that the sustainability plan in Boulder would be adopted here? Probably not. But it's important for us to talk about, sustainability in that bigger picture. And also for me as a public works professional, I think one of the key terms is part of that is resiliency. And what that means to me is, as a director who's been through more than one flood, it's not just about making sure that you have at least one bridge that'll span the river in a 1,000-year event so your city's not cut in half and you can provide emergency services. It's about how resilient your community is to bounce back after an event like that, whether it's weather-related disaster, which we often think of, or COVID, and the economic resiliency that comes with that. So to me, that's what a sustainability plan is. We've never really had that discussion here in this community. And it's something that I think as a community, we need to discuss at some point and figure out what's important to us.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go to Kelly.
Thanks, Keith. I agree with Scott. It's always nice to see you, but we need some good news. I don't know. I thank you for that presentation. It was a lot of information. I think, aside from just the basic keeping the city running, what would be the next thing that you would love to see completed or started on? I guess if you had, I don't know, maybe I'm not saying the question right. If you just doing the basic city maintenance, city services, what would be something that's very pressing that you would love to get completed or started now? Whether it be, I know you said there's one building, one of the service buildings that that's having some maybe structural issues. So something like that.
Yeah, I think that, I think that of all those master plans, to me, that's important. I think, finishing up a facilities master plan is important because, that's a place where the public interacts with us a great deal. And there's some that are just back house, but I think we need to have that discussion because we're going to need to really understand what we need to think about with things like our library and our museum, our Littleton Center, and to be honest with you, in a way, I'm kind of excited about what's happened with COVID because it's really forced a renegotiation with the workforce and employers and how we interact. And I think that's a really important facet of COVID. And so to me, I think that's important, because like right now we're in the midst of a $500,000 project at the library just to make the elevator ADA compliant. And we did everything we could to make sure that we're not limiting our options in the future, but we still don't have a future concept or design of where we want to go for a facility like that. And to me, that's a community engaged part of a facilities master plan.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, we'll go to Karina, then Carol, then Patrick.
Thank you. Hello, Keith.
Hello.
So let's see, I have a couple of questions. Which one do I want to ask first? The near term, you talked about the near term being the 2.5 million unfunded share that we still haven't solved for. And I think shovel ready was also in the near term, if I remember correctly. So how do we ensure we focus our money where it is an eminent need, and in this case, an eminent need, because we have committed to our local share in order to gain those grant dollars that we requested. And where I'm going with this is, in maybe it was about a month ago where you've come to us, and I'm just using this as an example of funding for some of these other master plans or other projects, and that funding, instead of going to some of those other projects, can go to fill the gap for the 2.5. So I guess I want to have a better understanding of how are we making those smaller decisions, but really if we say no to some of those smaller decisions, we can address this big issue that we have here of 2.5 million. So that's where I'm not understanding what our approach or our strategy is going to be to essentially fill this 2.5 million gap.
So there's kind of two parts there. I'll start at sort of the 30,000 foot level, which is, it's understanding from all of those needs across the city, not just public works, it's police, it's all of those other needs. Library, museum, where we want to fund, and making decisions across that entire portfolio. Within public works, part of the decision making, for example, let's take the pavement maintenance versus large capital construction. So we're at a point in a lot of our roadways where if we do basic maintenance, we can spend $100,000 a mile versus $1 million a mile. And we have places in the city where, because we didn't do any of that maintenance, now we're into a reconstruct situation, which is the $1 million a mile. And so as we've thought, for example, about this year and where we need to direct our money, for example, during COVID, as we think about that, taking care of things like basic pavement maintenance is a way for us to not create a multi-million-dollar problem down the road. And so some of the prioritization that we're doing, and related to the bigger tip question, and I've said this to council before, we don't control the federal cycle. And so if we don't go into that process a year ago and in essence be aggressive, that puts us at least another 6 years out from having funding. So, that's part of not having that strategy before that. We had to be aggressive and just kind of move when we could. So that's part of that balance that we have to strike. And, for me, we looked through that, we sorted out, and, it's a complex mix and there's art and science to it. But getting 2 more master plans where we can weigh all of those things, I think, across one larger matrix, I think is an important place to get to.
Mark, you want to say something?
Sorry, unmute myself. Yeah, I think Karina's question, quite honestly, is going to get to the heart of what we're going to have to wrestle with here this August and September when we start looking at the 2021 budget and really the 5-year plan. We all know that our capital project fund was difficult here before COVID-19 because we have, again, as Tiffany and Keith have touched on, we have lots of things inside the capital project fund. We've got all the facilities, we got vehicles, we got lease payments. So transportation is just one piece of that. So how do we sort through and decide what is the priority? Very tough question. Now we're faced with drop in revenue in the capital project fund, gas tax and building use tax. So it becomes even more difficult. And now we have been successful in some of these grants. And so what is the strategy? At the retreat, and certainly in the past few years, we have talked about the possibility of going out for an increase in sales tax and targeted very specifically to perhaps around transportation and managing growth. And, we've had, again, some conversation. Now COVID-19 has kind of put a wrinkle on that because our economy perhaps may not recover as quickly as perhaps we want. So what's the timing of that? Ultimately, I do believe we're going to have to go to our citizens and ask for a targeted sales tax increase to manage transportation and the growth in our community. I see no way around it. However, in the short term, I think what we're going to have to talk about is this $2.5 million gap. The strategy could be, in order for us to meet our obligations on the grants and manage the expectations at Mineral and Santa Fe, is we're going to have to look at the $3 million allocation from the general fund to the capital project fund. It was passed by an ordinance very specific to street maintenance, but I think in this crisis, we're going to have to step back and decide, how are we going to meet that obligation? One of the last things you ever want to do is release those kind of grant funds, because Dr. Cog in the process will remember that for a very long time. So again, we'll talk all about this. This is one of the core issues that Karina's raised. It has to be addressed in August and September.
Good. Yeah, thank you. Carol, I noticed your internet was kind of cutting in and out, so we better get to you now while you're good.
Yeah, I'm here right now. What is fiber on Broadway? Keith?
I don't, and when you see the item come up here in the next council or so, you'll see a map attached to that. And so, basically, at a quick scan level is what the project would do is install fiber on Broadway from.
Wait a minute. What is fiber?
What is fiber?
I think of vegetables in my digestive tract.
Well, we are, hopefully that's not it, but Scott and I've had some discussions about local food sourcing, so maybe we can include that in the project. But
focus.
Yeah, it's really it's a fiber optic cable, and allow us to run through the corridor. It's pretty exciting. Tie the signals together, do some really exciting stuff to improve traffic and safety out there on that corridor.
So it has to do with traffic management?
Absolutely, and it includes not only upgrading all of the intersections, the technology at all the intersections, but an upgrade in software that will allow us to have direct control of those from the Littleton Center with PD, and also interconnect those with our partners in the region in a similar platform, so we can continue to work towards that regional transportation effort that we've talked about consistently.
That alleviates some of the complaints we have from citizens about traffic.
Right.
Well, They just got to stop driving, and then we'll be fine.
They have. Patrick, I'm sorry, Carol.
I would like an answer to that. I'm not.
Yeah, to be honest with you, yes, absolutely. And as an example, in every one of those intersections with this enhanced fiber and technology, if we are successful with this grant, we're going to be able to add flashing yellow turd signals, arrow signals at every one of those intersections. We're going to be able to increase the vehicle detection both in the ground and the cameras. We're going to be able to put pan tilt zoom cameras out there to allow us to have real-time traffic management for emergencies with the police department. It's going to allow a whole bunch of that kind of work in real time. It'll allow us to adapt to what's going on out there, and we won't have to do it humanly. The computers will help us do that in real time.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah, just adding to what Keith is saying, you've heard the term traffic progression. So Carol, just adding to Keith's explanation, when a vehicle stops at one signal and moves through a corridor, by linking them through fiber optics, you're able to manage that in real time to keep the traffic moving and not stop intermittently at other signals. So that's the goal.
Lovely.
Thank you. Patrick?
Yeah, this is more of a statement than a question. I just wanted to thank Keith for that info. It's, again, I don't think it's for me at least, it was nothing new from what we've heard before. I think Mark is absolutely 100% correct. I think sales tax is intimate that we're going to probably have to go to vote on that and see if we can get that passed to help us out. Again, we're still one of the lowest cities in the front range on sales tax. So, the positive, of course, coming out of this meeting was, the grants that we've been able to secure. And the one thing that wasn't really addressed, Keith, was the $3 million or so, $3.2 million that with the passage of Southwest Fire, I didn't really see anything mentioned there, strictly dedicated to roads yearly.
So that's the $3.1 million. That's that transfer from the general fund to the capital fund.
Right.
And that right now is being used for pavement maintenance. You see that reflected in the new 5-year plan. It's paying for some of our own asphalt work and some of the stuff affiliated with that. So that's where that's currently allocated.
I get that, but I guess I didn't see it in this update, or was it there and I just missed it?
I think it might have been in there as a bullet point, but
Okay.
It's been, that's where that money is going currently.
Right. Okay. Fantastic.
Great. All right, we're going to do a second round of questions now. If everybody gets yourself ready, we'll start with Scott, and then we'll go. Let's go, Karina. Let's go with Scott first.
Keith, you and I have obviously talked probably more than you would like about the sustainability plan. I appreciate you being generous with your time and expertise. Everyone on council knows how keen I am on this issue. If this council and this community wants to move in that direction, how do we get started? What are some of the things that we can do along the way that you view as important, as fun, as community enhancing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Having been involved in several plans and, both as a director and as a consultant, we've actually started internally. We are currently inventorying all of our currently in practice sustainable activities into a few buckets. And we're just starting with an inventory to see where we are, just kind of like we were doing with the asset management. And then once we kind of get through that, it'll give us an opportunity to really understand what we're engaged in and what we're not, and then that's the place where we can start to consider a policy discussion about what's important and where we want to focus. Because one of the interesting things about sustainability as a whole is if I take everybody on the screen right now and ask them what that means, and what that means in Littleton, I'll probably get 9 different answers. And that's one of the challenges, but also one of the opportunities. And I think that starting with the inventory, sharing that with council as to what we're doing will be a good platform to start a discussion about how we engage on a policy side and on a community side to define what sustainability means for Littleton and how does that reflect our community values.
Great. All right, thank you. We'll go to Karina.
I can give my turn to Carol. I know she wanted to speak. Carol, do you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead, Karina. Carol coming up.
She was jumping. I just didn't know. Carol, do you want
jumpy. She's jumpy. Go ahead, Karina.
Can't hear you.
Karina, do you have a question?
Carol, can't hear you.
Karina, do you have a question?
I do. I was just trying to be courteous to Carol.
Thank you.
I do have a question. I want to come back to opportunities and technology in the current environment and COVID, in particular, CARES dollars. So as you stated, there are some projects that you've had to shift potentially. So how do we leverage the CARES money as we think about facilities and now what we may have to think about or plan for that we never maybe envisioned or never thought would be as eminent or as necessary? And this touches on that resiliency component as well. So that's the first part of one part of the question in particular as it relates to facilities. Then the second part, again, with the CARES money in mind, is technology. So as this situation has forced us to leverage technology to serve our constituents and our community as a whole, how do we put into place or think about using technology as a new way of thinking? So when you even think about the fiber that's going through Broadway for traffic management, can that fiber going through Broadway also address accessibility, Wi-Fi accessibility to an underserved population that may not have access to that? So how do we start, kind of making that leap?
Yeah, good question. Mark, did you want to take that on?
I'll jump in and then I'll pitch to Mark. So, certainly as an internal team, we're focused on how we can leverage that CARES Act money. And, as a holistic organization from a variety of fronts, I've told them I'm more than happy to spend all of it, but that's not the direction we need to go as a city. For example, on the technology side, one of the things that's come out of COVID is, for example, virtual building inspections, which most communities were very reluctant to do prior to this. And, those are the kind of things that, moving forward, we just need to make a decision that's part of a standard business practice. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. We're certainly seizing that as much as we can, and we'll continue to try and embrace that. From that perspective, it's just part of continuing to, adopt business practices. And certainly I'm going to pitch it over to Mark because he's sort of at the point on, how we're coming together as a team to tackle the CARES Act question and how we can be successful with it.
Yeah, Mark, you want to go ahead and chime in there?
Yeah, just quickly to add there, I think another key issue that Karina's touched on here, we do have a kind of an internal task force here, Keith's part of it, who is trying to sort through the CARES Act and kind of decide and ultimately recommend to council what's the priority. The technology piece is quite fascinating, and Ashley Bolton, our IT director, is part of that team. So it is an opportunity for all of us to kind of think differently about how we do business. And so how this plays out with the CARES Act would be, quite honestly, is going to be fascinating. The money's only going to go so far, and Ashley Bolton's already told me she could spend the whole 4.4 million just by herself. So we obviously going to have some tough challenges. The one piece, though, that I do want to highlight, and Keith touched on it in his presentation, there's a Senate bill for which, if the city does want to provide some kind of a Wi-Fi opportunity here, then there is a vote of the people that's required here. And we've talked about this a little bit in the past. In fact, I think many of you on council previously maybe remember some of that conversation. We had been thinking about that as staff here and teeing that up here at some point to get permission. So for example, we could have a city Wi-Fi system on our main street that people could access. And we could also do that in very key corridors, Littleton Boulevard or whatever it might be, for very strategic purposes. I think that's worth another future discussion, but ultimately we're going to have to go to a vote here by state law in order to get permission to do that.
Great, thank you. All right, we'll go to Carol, then Kelly, then Patrick.
Before we start the second round of questions, Pat asked the question, asked about how West Metro Fire District fit into the plan, and Keith answered that. I didn't know that we had a relationship with West Metro Fire District. So Keith, could you explain your answer of how that happens?
I think I answered directly on the fire question. It was really our move from our fire department to South Metro Fire is what.
So we were talking about South Metro, not West Metro.
Right. West Metro doesn't touch us. They're maybe out in Trailmark they do, but not nearby.
Okay,
so,
thank you.
They still do Trailmark, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
That isn't what I was asking about, Chair.
No, and you have a question. Was that it, Carol?
I asked my question and I got the answer.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. All right, Kelly.
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. Thanks, Karina, for asking the question about internet service technology and how we can better assist our citizens, especially those that may not have access to it going forward. I think that's super important. And I will say, I just counted the number of plans. I'm assuming that you've instituted since 2015. 15 plans. That's amazing. That is so amazing. All of those different plans that had never been in place, and you did it within a 5-year period. That's pretty impressive. So, round of applause.
I had less gray hair then, so we'll get our way to the rest of those plans soon.
All right, thank you, Patrick.
No further questions.
Cool. All right, I just have one comment. I know, Mark, when you started, what year did you start?
Oh, let's see, 2015.
Yeah, because I remember when you came in, you started pointing out all these plans that we did not have, and then the possibility of the huge expense that we're going to have. And then when Keith came in, he kind of polished off that your statements there of putting those plans together. So that's great. I just have one thing. Going forward with when we talk about the highway user tax, do we have anything as far as the electrical chargers? Because electric cars, that type of technology is going to be more and more, it's going to keep growing, I believe. Do we have any plan for that at this point?
We have some infrastructure right now, but very limited, and we continue to explore those options going forward. And we've worked with Excel already to establish within their network the the easiest locations to begin to bring access to, both on public and private property. There's still a capital expense to get those things going, but that's certainly part of the long-term transportation planning, within the overall transportation network for our community as well as the region.
Great. Thank you. All right. We're going to go to our third round of questions here. We'll start with Pam.
I didn't get my second.
Oh, no, you didn't. I'm sorry. I skipped you. I apologize.
Okay. I'm not clear, and I don't know who this question's for. Are we providing any direction on policy tonight, or is this really being pushed off until the budgeting process?
Mayor, I'll jump in here. I think it really is, Keith is teeing this up here for August and September. I think the capital project fund is probably the big piece here, this shortfall of 2.5 million plus.
Okay, so then if I understand this correctly from all this discussion, the solutions to the 2.5 million are sales tax increase and or moving money from the general fund to the capital fund and possibly leveraging some COVID funds for facilities and things like that. That's the solution?
Well, the money, I might add, the alternative that I was talking about, Pam, was we already make a transfer of $3 million from the general fund to the capital project fund for street maintenance. That was a result of the fire vote here a couple of years ago. That had a very specific purpose of street maintenance per an ordinance the council passed. I think in these extraordinary circumstances, quite honestly, this COVID crisis and our funding challenge, the council may want to reconsider that ordinance and dedicate at least a portion of that to meeting our match obligations on these grants to manage the growth problems. This is Mineral and Santa Fe largely, to some extent, I guess, on Broadway or County Line. So tough issues, no easy solutions.
We don't want to lose those grants because that would not be good for the long run.
Right.
And we want to be able to match those grants where possible. Is that?
As Keith said, yes, this is we're in a 6-year cycle, and if we were to lose that, we would be out another 6 years, and we've secured, what is it, Keith, roughly 20 million?
Okay. I was just trying to synthesize our options here. Thank you.
All right, cool. All right, we'll go ahead and let's start with Karina. Karina, you have any more questions? Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking up. Does anyone else on council have any more questions? We'll go Carol, Scott. Carol?
Mark, for what you just said there, this is going to be a two-parter, I think. Mark, am I correct in interpreting what you said there, that you're proposing the possibility of using the money that was designated in the fire transfer to be used for street repair, to use that for something else? Is that right?
Correct.
And then second question is that something that we can legally do, since that was promised to the voters as the deal?
Good question. Good question.
I would say that legally you can. Politically is the challenge.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Legally you can.
I would say that then I'm going to make a statement. That would make me really nervous, since that was the deal with the taxpayers and the voters. That they would get streets in exchange for paying more for fire.
I think there would also be an opportunity to look at a strategy to whatever we take for the grant match for growth projects to somehow pay that back over time. That would be also part of the discussion here in August and September.
Okay, good. All right. Scott?
Yeah, I don't disagree with Carol about feeling a little uncomfortable about doing that, but we'll get to it. The question I have is, Keith, on your list of plans, there's one called solid waste. Just vis-a-vis the conversation council had at our last study session, what is that? And how might it apply to the follow-up conversation we're going to have about solid waste here shortly?
I just added that to the list, knowing that councils, we talked about it here a couple of weeks ago. And so, it's one of those things that's more in the sense that it's not saying we're going to do a plan, but it's recognizing the fact that, you know, when you look at all the plans on that list, it takes resources to do those things. And those are plans, you know, like the ones that are in blue over there. You've got water resources, sustainability, solid waste, and I think there's one other. And, you know, those are plans that could potentially be out there in the offing, and there's really nothing done on those now. And we need to understand there may be resources needed to accomplish those goals if council chooses to go in that policy direction.
Great. All right. Thank you. Anyone else have a question? Karina.
I have a statement and a request. I think, thank you, Pam, for synthesizing. But Mark, what I'm also hoping for and looking for when we have that discussion is what truly are all of our options. You know, not this past retreat, but the retreat before that, we put everything against a whiteboard, right? So, and maybe some of those are not popular, but again, we're in a very different situation. We may look at some of those differently. So it's not just about, you know, what are the 3 recommendations that Pam just synthesized, but really big picture, what are some of the other things that maybe we had not considered? I keep wanting us to ensure that we are remaining focused on where the priority is. While I appreciate, this is my background, having so many plans, to have a plan that we will never be able to execute on. So all of those fantastic plans that Keith did, and they're so insightful to us, I think we're starting to get to a point where we're 80% there with the most critical plans. Now, how do we start moving to implementation, focusing Keith's time, his people's resources now towards implementation of plans, as opposed to building more plans that we can't do anything with? We already know that now. And by the time we get to it 20 years from now, we may have to redo the plans because it's a different situation. So I'm asking for focus.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. And focus is what I agree that we need to stay, because things have changed a little bit. And Mark, when I was just looking at our schedule, when we go, what is that, another couple weeks yet? Regular meetings before we go to the council priorities. Sam will probably know. She knows everything.
Well, the 23rd is the update, the financial update here by Tiffany. And she's also going to share with council what is this kind of hybrid budget schedule. Obviously, we're trying to balance a couple of things, the financial challenge in 2020, and then also developing a 2021 budget. So we'll talk about that on the 23rd.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Well, Mark, if you don't have anything else, let's get on, because we have I know another item is going to take a little bit of time.
Yes.
So cool. All right. Let's go ahead and thank you very much, Keith. Appreciate it. Oh, Mark, do you have the direction you need on that you were hoping for?
I sure do.
Great. Thank you. All right. So we're going to move down to we're going to go into the city manager. Let's start right there. And I think we still have the chief online with us too, I think.
Yes. So under the city manager comments, or updates, we've got really 2 issues here. The first one is the Senate Bill 2217, the Law Enforcement Integrity Act. And this is kind of related here to the George Floyd tragedy and the response to that over the last several days here. We're going to talk a little bit about what our legislature is considering and actually what's in process here. I just want to make a couple of opening comments about this. Our Chief Doug Stevens is also here to kind of share, what we have done historically when it comes to policing here within our own community and the level of effort and training that we've done with our own Littleton department. And I'm certainly very proud of that effort. That's not to say there isn't things that we couldn't learn here from current events, but I do want to share what Chief Stevens has done. And then Reed Betzing, our city attorney, he's ready to kind of brief the council on what our legislature's been working through. In fact, I think there was action today on that. So if I may, Mayor and Council, let me just step back for a second here. You know, the George Floyd tragedy obviously has really shook this nation, and we are seeing something that very rarely happens in this country, at least at this magnitude. However, what we're seeing, in my opinion, is an example of what is different about this country than any other place on the planet. It's not just the protests. What's different about us in the United States is what we do in response to that. We do respond. We do have change. Sometimes it's very difficult. And our history is just littered with examples. And sometimes that history isn't pretty. And I believe that that's kind of the stage that we're in right now. All of us are kind of living that moment in history. And I think as leaders, as certainly as the city council and myself as the city manager, I think it is a time for us to kind of reflect, to step back, to listen. I think it takes a great deal of empathy and certainly tolerance when we talk about these kinds of issues here, and truly try to understand what is happening here and how does that really affect our community in this instance. I think it's, again, it's an opportunity for us to kind of listen and learn and reflect back on our own department. And that's, I think what we're here tonight to do is really to kind of maybe start that process. And so maybe with that, I'd like to have Doug Stevens, our police chief, kind of step in here and share a little bit about our history here when it comes to policing in our community.
Thank you.
Hey, good evening, Council.
Howdy.
Hi. So Mark asked me to join you tonight and give you a little bit of an update. I know many of you have been contacted by constituents who are concerned about how we're doing things in Littleton, what the Littleton Police Department does to try to minimize the likelihood that a tragic incident like the George Floyd death in Minneapolis could ever occur here. And as you all know, I mean, we've talked many times about your police department and the level of professionalism that our officers have and maintain, and through support from our community and through support from the city council and manager Ralph, we are able to maintain a high level of training and oversight and transparency that helps us minimize those types of risks and helps us build upon a positive relationship with our community, which I think is reflected in the support that you often hear for our police officers in your daily work. And then also recently just released a resident survey from 2020, which ranks the Littleton Police Department very high in their relationship with the community. And you'll all be seeing that soon if you haven't seen it already. So some of the things that we've done and do and continue to do to really address issues that are really being brought up all over the country now. And unfortunately, this is not the first tragic incident of this nature. And let me say that there's not a single law enforcement professional that I know in the Littleton Police Department or in any police department, any of my peers that I've discussed this with or talked to, that think that what happened in Minneapolis was acceptable in any way. That officer was way out of line. There's no excuse for that behavior, and it's appalling, actually, from a professional law enforcement officer's perspective. I've been in law enforcement nearly 30 years now, and never once have I ever been taught a technique like that or utilized a technique like that. In fact, we're trained regularly and have been for years on how to minimize those types of techniques that would cause or could cause serious injury or death. So what do we do here in Littleton to maintain our high levels of training and standards? And obviously, I'm going to start with the very obvious one, which is our accreditation. So accreditation, for folks who may be watching who aren't really familiar with it, there's the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, or CALEA. It's an international body, basically, that they're experts on best practices in law enforcement. In order to be a CALEA accredited agency, you must comply with, in our case, over 380 national best practices. Those are the CALEA standards, and we're compelled to comply with those standards and then show our compliance with those standards annually through random audits from CALEA assessors. And then every 4 years, we have an on-site week-long audit that goes in depth to every single one of those 380 standards. We must show proof that we've complied every year with every single one of those standards. It's a big commitment, and we have a full-time employee who just manages the documentation for that for us. But it says a lot about the commitment that the Littleton Police Department has to professionalism, and that CALEA accreditation forces us, for lack of a better term, to make sure that we have contemporary standards, contemporary policies. We're constantly reviewing our policies and updating them to reflect the current best practices. Part of our CALEA accreditation includes annual assessments that we do internally, including reports on our annual use of force. We have an early warning system for officers that have an inordinate number of incidents, whether it's car accidents, whether it's citizen complaints, whether it's use of force complaints. We look at those things on an early warning intervention system. We analyze every single year our compliance and practices with our bias-based policing policy to make sure that we're being fair and impartial in the way we conduct enforcement. We analyze every year our complaints, our citizen complaints and our internal complaints on officers. And we always are looking for all these things. We're looking for patterns and trends where we can identify deficiencies and modify our policy or training so that we can correct those deficiencies. So CALEA is probably the best tool we have. Of the 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, 1,400 are CALEA accredited. So that tells you the commitment that takes. Only 6% of law enforcement agencies are accredited. Of the 240 plus law enforcement agencies in the state of Colorado, there's only 19 accredited agencies. So about 7% in Colorado. So we're very proud of that accreditation. We work hard to maintain it, to comply with the best standards and practices. In addition to that, we have a very robust training program. I know a lot of questions that I've been receiving, and maybe you guys have been receiving as well, go into what does Littleton Police Department do to train their officers on anti-bias, on cultural diversity, on community policing, on use of force, proper use of force, on ethics. And while the state of Colorado, through the Police Officer Standardized Training Board, POST board certifies all police officers in Colorado. POST has mandated 24 hours a year per officer for training. That's the minimum requirement that officers have for in-service training per year. The Littleton Police Department averages over 10 hours per month per officer. So on average, over 120 hours of training per officer in a myriad of topics. Most recently, every single employee of the Littleton Police Department, actually the city of Littleton, went through anti-bias training and implicit bias training that was provided by our HR department. Very recently completed, before these incidents had occurred. Our policy states annually our officers will be trained on those types of topics. So we have a very robust training program. We've always supported training in an organization, and we have the budget and have had the budget to allow our officers to seek training and for us to provide very high quality professional training. When it comes to complaints from citizens, we have very low complaints. It's on average, I would say we average I certainly know we average less than 5 complaints a year externally. And most years we'll have 0 complaints from community members that are investigated through internal affairs. And I think that says a lot about the way our officers are interacting with the community that they serve. Use of force. So when we're analyzing our use of force every single year, we look at our statistics, we look at the number of calls we go on, the number of custodial arrests we make, the number of documented use of force incidents, types of force that are used, officers involved, obviously, and a number of other topics. And again, we're looking for patterns or trends, ways that we can improve our training, modify our policy to minimize the uses of force and prevent injury and do our job safely. Last year, 2019, our last annual review, we responded to over 53,000 calls for service where Littleton officers went to a call and handled a call for service. Of those 53,000 calls, we made approximately 1,350 custodial arrests, which means we actually put handcuffs on someone and took them to jail about 1,350 times. Many other people are issued citations and released, and those count as arrests as well when you're talking about statistics. But we actually went hands-on with people, putting handcuffs on them 1,350 times. Out of those 1,350 times in 2019, we had 14 documented uses of force. So you're talking about 1%. of all contacts where we took someone to jail and arrested them resulted in a use of force incident. Every single use of force incident that our officers use is documented on the spot, complete statements, interviews, photos, video, everything. It's a total investigation from the start, completed by a street supervisor. And then that investigation goes all the way through the chain of command. It starts with that supervisor who completes the investigation, makes a recommendation as to whether or not that was within policy or not within policy. And then that goes up the chain of command to the commander. The commander will review everything, make the same recommendation or finding whether it was in policy or not in policy. That goes to the division chief. Division chief will do the exact same thing. And then I personally see every single use of force incident in our department and have to sign off on every single one. So that you can tell that we take it very seriously, our use of force, and that we are very thorough in our documentation and investigation of our use of force. So those are our basic elements on training and policy. We find, back to CALEA really quick, one of the things that I like personally as a police chief about CALEA is that we are held to that standard every single year. A lot of agencies, police agencies, find it very difficult without full-time people assigned just to policy. Their policies can go stale very, very quickly. They can miss updated case law. They can not keep up with the rapid changes in what's happening in police technology and police training and police tactics. And it's very easy for policies to go stale and be outdated. And through CALEA, we're able to maintain ours on a yearly basis and an annual basis. And it's a constant state of review. So we really like that. Other things that we've done in Littleton that we're really proud of, and you all know and you support it, is the co-responder program. You know, it's not just use of force on folks that are being arrested, but there's been a national issue with use of force involved when officers go to assist people who are having mental health crises. And in order to reduce those types of frequencies and incidents, we have a co-responder program where we partner with an agency outside of the police department, All Health Network, and their psychological clinicians accompany us on calls, and they go on calls with us and are able to provide services immediately to people who are experiencing mental health crises. And we believe that not just in Littleton, but agencies throughout the metro area and the state and the country that use these programs have found that there's been a significant reduction in the number of times that officers are needing to be involved in these types of cases, which we would like to minimize our involvement because it's really not a law enforcement situation. It's more of a mental health situation. And again, by coordination with that entity, with All Health, we're able to reduce those incidents where the officers are dealing directly with that individual, which may result in a use of force situation. But we have the All Health professionals there that are more greatly trained in how to properly deal with that. Talking about our training when dealing with mental health folks, one other thing that we've had over the last several years is a crisis intervention team training, where our officers are trained in better being able to deal with folks that are dealing with mental health issues. It's a very intense training, 40 hours of training that all officers attend. 100% of our patrol force and all of our dispatchers are CIT, crisis intervention team trained. And that helps us reduce the likelihood that a force would be used. Big piece of CIT training and a big piece of our use of force training involves de-escalation. So it's our goal always, and it always has been in law enforcement for us, as soon as we arrive on a scene, and maybe an emotionally charged scene, it could, people's emotions could be running very high, it could be very chaotic. Our role there, as quickly as possible, is to de-escalate those situations and calm people down, get to the bottom of what's happening, and take the appropriate action. So toward that training, our use of force training incorporates, and we've used it, incorporated much more in the last several years, are dynamic role-playing situations where we have officers, let's say we're going to train on the use of the taser. Traditional training in the past may have been, okay, here's how a taser works, here's what it does physiologically, here's the times when you can use it, here's the use of force policy, here's the legal ramifications, here's when we would, and then you go shoot the taser into a target, and that's your training. Now what we do is we'll incorporate role players into our use of force training, and the officers will be given a scenario, and we won't even necessarily say it's a taser scenario, just a scenario. You're going to this call. This is the circumstances. They go into a room, and that particular training exercise may end in any number of different ways, depending upon how the officer acts. So if the officer goes in and exercises proper de-escalation techniques, uses good cover between them and the barriers between them and physical distancing between them and the person that is emotionally charged or posing a threat, uses sound tactics, that scenario may end with the officer successfully resolving that with absolutely no use of force. There are other situations where an officer may not have de-escalated properly, and then the role player will escalate up based on the officer. And there's lessons to be learned there for that officer if they have to use a level of force that maybe some officers did not have to use. It's very valuable for us as assessors as well, because we can identify officers who show some of those trends that they may not have the verbal skills or the other skills that they need, and then we can provide them with supplemental training to help them along the way. So I think I'll stop there on basically our training and accreditation and policy and procedures and open it up. I know some of you probably have questions, and I know Reed wants to talk about pending legislation, and I certainly have some input on that as well, but I'll turn it over to you guys.
Jerry, you're muted.
I was going to say, Reed, if you could maybe just bring council up to speed on 217, Senate Bill 217.
Sure.
Where we are in the potential costs.
Yeah, as council may be aware, Senate Bill 2217 was introduced last week and immediately picked up ahead of steam. It's generally known as the Law Enforcement Integrity Act, and generally it could lead to some pretty profound impacts for, I think, a lot of law enforcement agencies in terms of cost, how it may affect policing, and how it affects liability for some of our police officers. Over the last week, CML and CIRSA and other organizations have been involved trying to lobby the Senate to accept certain amendments. I don't know if that has been largely successful. There have been some small wins along the way as they've developed this legislation, but kind of the highlights, if you will, of what this bill, and I will tell you that it has a lot of bipartisan support. It passed the Senate this afternoon on a vote of 32-1. So it's going to go to the House now, and the House will have the opportunity to do their amendments and whatever they're going to do. But some of the notable aspects of this bill as it relates to police enforcement is it requires body-worn cameras. So by July 1st, 2023, all law enforcement agencies in the state of Colorado are going to have body-worn cameras. That presents a few different issues associated with that. One, it's the initial cost of body-worn cameras. Two, it's the data storage. I think as we've heard a lot about body-worn cameras over the years, one of the big costs associated with it is the terabytes of data that go into these body-worn cameras. Additionally, it's staffing. You're going to need at least a couple FTEs associated with it to be able to manage that data, to be able to redact, to blur out images. A lot of officers are responding to scenes that are graphic in nature. There's juveniles involved. There's other individuals that are involved that have nothing to do with a particular case. They just are bystanders. And you're going to have someone staffed to go through and redact and blur out those images. Doug, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk a little bit about BWCs and potential costs for your organization, and then I'll get back into the fun stuff.
Sure. Thanks, Reed. So first off, I'm a proponent of body cameras. I think that they offer a great deal of transparency and The public feels confident about their use, and it helps build additional confidence in the law enforcement and the local police jurisdictions. We actually were set to pilot a program in Littleton to start evaluating body camera systems earlier this year before the COVID pandemic hit. And then that got put on standby based on, some very real budget concerns that we may have moving forward. But I think they offer a lot for our community, but that comes at a very high financial cost. So the fiscal note that's attached to the proposed legislation is pretty accurate for what we've found, and I found in my research in what body camera systems would cost Littleton. And the fiscal note states, for the state law enforcement agencies, they planned on approximately $1,400 per camera acquisition costs, so startup upfront costs, and then approximately $2,000 per year per camera for data storage and evidence management, which for our agency, we anticipate needing approximately 60 cameras to outfit all of our patrol division, which is consistent with other agencies our size. You're talking about, $120,000 a year for data, and that's and then another $85,000, $89,000, $90,000 startup upfront costs for the cameras. And that's not including, like Reed was saying, the staff we would need. Most agencies have a minimum of 2 FTE just to manage the data requests and comply with. That's prior to even this legislation, which would mandate very specific and very rapid timelines for full disclosure of video to the public. So those disclosures of the videos, like Reed said, would require us to redact a lot of different pieces from some of those videos, blur out faces of juveniles, limit the amount of information on sexual assault type calls. There's a lot of calls where officers would go on where there's an expectation of privacy that folks would not want out there with on the video. So there's a lot of issues that involved with the cameras themselves. So those are your costs. You're looking at, there's packages that we would probably look at with some vendors that would approximately $120,000 a year, which would rotate equipment through as well.
Thanks, Chief. In addition to that, I would tell you that this will probably have an impact on prosecuting, whether that's in our municipal courts or if it's at the district court level. In a few years, someone is going to want to have the videotape of the officer that pulled them over for speeding, because they're going to be required to have it on, and they're going to want to see it because they don't believe they're speeding. And so it's just kind of adding that additional element for our prosecutors to keep track of as well. Additionally, there's a lot of reporting requirements. Kind of any police contact that happens, which is anytime that the police, let's say it's a traffic stop or they're responding to a call, they're going to be required to maintain a bunch of information and report that back to the Attorney General's office for every single stop. So we're talking about the perceived demographic of the person that was stopped or contacted, the time it was, the date, the location, the duration of the actual stop, what happened as a result of that stop, what crime were they suspected of doing, what was the result of that. And that's going to have to be, all that data is going to have to be reported back to the Attorney General's office. There's other things within the bill, such as banning the use of, KIPs, or we'll call them rubber bullets, pepper ball bullets, banning the use of tear gas, and that's as it relates to protests. That's within this Senate bill as well. Probably one of the most challenging aspects of the bill is a removal of qualified immunity. So qualified immunity is not going to be a defense that a police officer is going to enjoy. And just generally speaking, qualified immunity essentially protects a police officer from liability if at the time he was doing it, a reasonable person would have acted kind of in the same way, or they had a reasonable belief that what they were doing was lawful. That's gone in this bill. And so some of the fears that some of the police legal advisors have and other folks around the state is that this is going to lead to an increase in cases being filed. And to add to that, I will tell you that a successful person would get attorney's fees. If the city was successful in defending one of these suits, it's basically not going to happen that the city's going to recoup any attorney's fees. A court would have to find that the claim was frivolous, and that's a pretty high burden. There's no cap on damages. There potentially a police officer could be personally liable for a percentage of the verdict if it was found by the city that the person was not acting in good faith. It basically redefines the use of force entirely by our police officers. It bans chokeholds. And kind of another fun part of it is that, you know, these reports that get sent, and Doug had talked about the quick turnaround, and that I'll kind of switch gears, but, you know, we have to turn over those videos within 21 days. So it's a lot of, you know, quick turnaround. It's going to be people rushing to have things done in order to comply. But the Attorney General's office is going to take a look at law enforcement, each of the local jurisdictions, and technically, if they made a finding that there was a pattern and practice of unlawful conduct by our police officers or by an organization, they could essentially sue us. The Attorney General's office could sue the individual department if we didn't make a meaningful change to address that within 60 days. So we've talked about kind of the direct costs with BWCs and data, the employee issue, but it's really kind of the liability issue that is most at risk here. And this is not just confined to the state of Colorado. It is going on a federal level too. There's a lot of changes that are coming out, and it's called the Justice and Policing Act that was announced yesterday. It's a federal type law, which kind of covers a lot of the same things. But one of the other things I haven't mentioned that I guess I need to mention is, you know, not only may this have an issue for recruiting police officers in the future, but the city's insurance premiums. So the city contracts through CIRSA, and CIRSA provides a bunch of different insurance coverages for the city, whether it's property and liability coverage, but they also provide coverage for our police officers when they're sued. So the city spends probably close to about $500,000 a year on CIRSA coverage. Not all of that is for the police. That's probably just for Doug. But I imagine that those rates and the rate structures that a lot of municipalities and local police agencies have been paying are going to go up quite substantially. So we figured we'd bring this to council's attention, not only because of the timeliness in regard to what Chief Stevens and his department is doing, the civil unrest that council has seen, but to prepare yourselves, I guess, if you will, for costs. I seriously doubt we'll get very, very many meaningful changes as this hits the House. And so we're going to see some aspect of this bill, perhaps all aspects of what I've summarized, coming into fruition in the near future. So Doug, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that, but that concludes kind of my update on this particular Senate bill.
Right. So I don't want anybody to misinterpret that or believe that the Littleton Police Department is not open to oversight and transparency. We certainly welcome that. And I think that's evidenced through our voluntary commitment to CALEA accreditation. So, you know, there are some positive things I think that will come out of this, and that, you know, it's always a good thing for us and any other law enforcement organization to take another good, hard, introspective look at what we do and how we do it and make sure that we're doing things the right way. So we welcome that as well, and we continue to do that. Body worn cameras, one positive change Reed talked about in there, the start date on that was originally July 1st of 2021, which would have meant that by that date we would have needed to implement a full body worn camera program. By pushing it back to 2023, I think the legislature has recognized that if that's something they're going to move forward, it'll be signed into law. That would provide not just Littleton, but other agencies the opportunity to seek grant funding to, at least for the initial purchase of equipment, which is somewhat helpful. Obviously, the long-term costs are always in data storage, and we would be responsible for those, but gives us those opportunities to make a better decision on what we're going to do as far as policies and procedures and equipment. So I think that's a positive thing, at least.
All right. Well, thank you, Chief, for the update. So yeah, we're looking at probably right around over 400,000 startup, and probably about that on an ongoing cost, not including insurance and other legal stuff. So it is something that I think Littleton is committed to making sure that we provide the best service to our citizens and those that come to our city. And Chief, really appreciate you and the officers, all the training that y'all go through, and my prayers are out there for all of you guys to be safe and to make right decisions for us all. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thanks.
Yeah. Mark, did you have anything else in your report?
Well, once this topic is complete, Mayor, I do have one other issue just about how we manage some emails, but I'll look to your lead on that when we're ready.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do that now.
All right. Well, I think a few council members have kind of asked about what might be the most appropriate approach here for some emails on various topics here. I think actually, Reed, are you prepared to kind of talk a little bit about this here for both you and I?
Sure. As you mentioned, I've had council kind of reach out in regard to the best way for council to go about responding to citizen emails. So all council, I'm sure, get the email from constituents, whether they're sent to you indirectly, whether they're sent to you collectively. I know that council doesn't want to violate the open meetings law, and the violation of the open meetings law occurs when 3 or more of you are on an email and respond back to someone. And so generally the question, there's kind of a couple questions, is how does council as a body want to go about responding to citizens and giving each other, I guess, enough information that they've responded. And secondly, just from a policy, I guess, perspective, is when should council seek out staff and when should they respond on their own on things? So it's really more of a discussion for council. I will tell you that when I see certain emails from constituents, what I like to do is I like to just put council in the BCC so that you understand what I've communicated back to a constituent. Everyone on council gets it, and it's not a violation of the open meetings law because there's no ability for you to hit the reply all. So that would kind of be my general legal advice for all of council when you're responding back to a constituent. If you feel the need to respond back to them, to just BC City Council so that everyone knows what it is that went out, so that everyone is not kind of duplicating efforts. I'm sure there's probably some citizens out there that are going to get 4 individual emails from council members, and perhaps you have other things to do. Additionally, and Mark can jump in on this one, it's fine to just respond back to a citizen and copy Mark or copy myself, depending on what the question is, and say, I'll have the city manager look into this and get back to you. And that way they can be put in touch, or Mark can get in touch, or I can get in touch with the appropriate staff to answer the question rather than perhaps council doing extra work. So Mark, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think just many of you already do that. I think you feel, looks like, pretty comfortable handing that off to me. My practice has been to respond to those, and obviously, just as Reed described, I will copy council, typically BCC. In fact, I did a few of those here today. So in some cases, there may be an instance on a topic where maybe if you want to refer it to myself, there may be a more general statement that perhaps even the mayor might want to kind of respond to. And certainly there's been instances of that, and both Reed and I have kind of assisted Jerry, in this case, as the mayor, to maybe prep something. Those tend to be a little rare, but I think it really is up to council for you guys to discuss on how you might want to handle that.
Well, let's open it up to council. Does anybody want to say anything at this time? Carol has her hand up. Go ahead, Carol.
I have gotten less brave than I used to be about responding to citizen emails about really broad national topics. For example, like, let's say, what's the city doing about policing? That would be this week's new one, because then I don't know the right words to say it the best way. And I found that Mark and Reed do have those words. And so I'm much more comfortable now letting them do it as the professionals rather than my trying to.
Yeah.
That's it.
Anyone else? We'll go Pam.
I agree with Carol. Staff has the information at their fingertips. Also, so what you're saying, Reed, is that if one council member responds, that they can blind copy us so that we know that another council member has responded to the citizen?
Correct.
So I just want to make sure that the citizen gets the information that they want and they're not dealing with multiple people going in multiple directions. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
All right. Anyone else would like to say comment? Yeah, looks like we have Karina.
I just want to say I do appreciate when Mark and Reed respond, that they're BCCing us or CCing us, so that we know that that loop has been closed. And I think it's also an opportunity for us to maybe learn something more about a certain topic in a greater amount of detail. So I do appreciate that, and would like to see that continue. And since there are messages that are going out from the mayor as well, so visibility to those would be helpful to us too, because I know as the mayor, it's to a certain degree a representation of all of council. So I think that's because I know there are certain matters that should come from the role of mayor, just because it makes sense, right? So I think that'd be good for us to be aware of as well.
And I will say, typically for me, what I do is I send it to Mark, and we'll ask Mark if he wants to address it, or does he want to send something to me, so then I'll address it. But typically that's how I handle it. I'll take, for instance, I had someone call me about some lights that were a problem for them the other day at one of the schools. So I send that to Mark, and Mark gets a hold of the appropriate people. Could be somebody at South Suburban, those type of issues. Anyone else want to comment? Cool. I do have one thing. Ray, you had mentioned the blind copying. So if I send to a constituent and I blind copy all the council, what about if it's just council members only communicating with each other? Let's say I send Carol a message by blind copy everybody else. Then Carol starts a conversation with, say, Scott, and then we're blind copying. Is there a danger there if it's just council members responding to each other but blind copying? A violation is what I'm asking about. He gives pretty good advice if you could only hear him.
Sorry. What you don't want to do is give the ability for 3 council members to participate in a conversation. So I would probably just keep conversations between you and Carol, or you and Mayor Pro Tem, to each other, and not CC council on those.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. I was just looking for clearance on that. Anybody else on this issue? Cool. All right. Well, Mark, you have any other report?
No, I do not, Mayor. That's it.
Thanks for having Chief Stevens with us tonight. Appreciate that. And really appreciate everything they're doing for us. We'll move on to the city attorney report.
Yeah, I think council has heard enough from me. Just 2 quick updates. One, just to let council know that there is a retail marijuana or recreational marijuana initiative, which has been finalized and certified by the clerk's office. So someone does intend on trying to gather the requisite signatures. This is not a general election, so they need 15% of those persons who voted in the 2019 election to get on the ballot. They have about a month to do it, and with social distancing, that may be challenging, but just wanted to put that on your radar. And additionally, I'm reminded, I had sent out an email to council yesterday afternoon regarding a new policy that the city is going to be implementing starting next week. And what that is a building valuation permit change. And under our previous policy, plan review fees were collected at the time that the permit was issued, and at which point the plan review had been complete for an unknown period of time. Yeah. What was ending up happening is an individual who backed out and decided they didn't want to go forward with their plans. We were ending up losing money on that. So the new policy that's going into effect starting next week, and this is really just an administrative policy, is going to call for the collection of a certain amount of those fees up front. And if someone did decide that they didn't want to go forward, we would refund a little bit of the money back to them, about 80% of the money back to them. But at least this way, staff was being compensated for their time, and just a way to kind of recoup some monies. But that is all I have.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And then the only thing I have tonight is that the meet, eat, and greet is canceled tomorrow at Kittering, of course. And so our next time we'll get together, council, will be next Tuesday for our regular meeting. Anybody else have anything? Karina?
I think I have some good news. So I did attend the Tri-County Health Department call today that includes commissioners, council members from different area, and they did say that the variance request that Arapahoe brought forward is being submitted to CDPH, Colorado Department of Public Health. Yeah.
There you go.
So the variance that is being requested is for gyms, houses of worship, and restaurants to be at 50% of capacity without an absolute, right now there's like an absolute number that it's the lesser of the two. So we're very hopeful, and they did say it'll take about 7 to 10 days to hear back. Malls was also on that, but it's not the 50%. It was some other calculation. But nonetheless, very encouraging that that's moving forward, and hopefully we'll have that response for our community soon.
Great. Oh, thank you. That's a good update. Yeah. All right. So did I hear you said up to 50% and not the up to 50 people anymore? That's
correct.
50.
So there's no absolute number anymore.
Excellent.
So if, for example, the View House has a capacity of 1,000, they'll be able to serve, and I'm still making that up, they'll be able to serve 500. So it's a lot more equitable across the board.
Yeah, that's great. And I know the city staff is working on getting our museum, at least the grounds, opened up sooner than we hope. Sooner the better, no doubt about it. And the playgrounds, I think they're still closed, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Mark?
Reed may have to help me out on the playgrounds. I'm not familiar enough there.
We just
play on the playgrounds.
We just got a notice from South Suburban that they opened them.
Yeah, playgrounds are open, and
they are open.
Yeah, and we should have more information on museum grounds reopening to council very shortly.
As soon. Okay, we got Pam, and then Scott.
This is anything on beaches like Chatfield Beach or anything like that?
I have not heard. That's not I haven't really paid attention to that issue unless Reed has.
It's not in our county, I don't think, but.
Yeah, I would assume that people can recreate on the beaches just as long as they're maintaining social distancing.
So Chatfield Beach is still closed, yet everybody surrounds these small little lakes, not on the beach, their own beaches.
Scott.
I'm just feeling a little remiss sitting here silently after Chief Stevens' remarkable presentation to council. Chief Stevens is the first person I asked to meet with when I was considering running for council. And I asked him, what do you think would make a good council member? And the reason I did that is because I view him as an extraordinary community leader. I went through the Police Citizen Academy, and Chief Stevens and the LPD leadership team and the department rank and file absolutely impressed me with their professionalism. And, you know, lest anyone hearing this think I'm some kind of partisan, you may have seen me on the news recently, and what it is I do, at least in part for my day job, right? This community is rightly proud of its police department. And I just want to thank Chief Stevens for his pitch perfect responses to constituents, his pitch perfect presentation at council, his leadership, and his department. I think that we should all give him a round of applause. I'm tremendously grateful for the work that he does. I mean, can't imagine what it's like to sit on the Minneapolis City Council right now. And so I'm just very grateful for that police department and the way that it does things. And the historic support that the City Council has given the department to enable it to do that kind of work. So
well said, Scott. Thank you very much for saying that. And Littleton Police have been a part of the CALIA certification going back at least about a dozen years. So even the prior chiefs have been very supportive of this program, and all city councils have all been supportive. And but you're absolutely right. We have an incredible police department as well as a chief. So if there is nothing else, then council, it is 9:11 and we are adjourned. Thank you.